Hello, YouTube. Sir Dragon X here. Today, we're going to discuss an app that has been promoted amongst the expat community as a simple and safe way to send money to Mexico. This app even comes with a Mexican debit card that gives 4% cash back on your purchases, and you can even earn interest on your deposits. Sounds great, right? Well, I have some concerns about this app because it uses cryptocurrency as a medium of exchange. So I decided to invite a cryptocurrency expert to explain exactly how this app works and why there are potential risks. As of the taping of this interview, there has been the largest cryptocurrency scam unfolding with one of the biggest cryptocurrency exchanges in the world. Several financial experts have even dubbed this as being potentially worse than the Bernie Maddoff scam. This scam is connected to a company called BlockFi, which works somewhat similar to the Dolar app. At this time, individuals with their money in BlockFi have lost access to their funds and are at risk of losing them. I know this interview may seem long, but I urge you to stick around to see why I and others have some concerns about the Dolar app. No matter who has recommended this app to you, you may want to watch this interview and proceed with caution when using this type of app, and we explain why. Here at Retired Life in Mexico, No Bull, we try to provide you with the best information so that you can make an informed decision. Let's get on to the interview, shall we? Welcome back to Retired Life in Mexico, No Bull. Today, I have a crypto expert that's going to explain a little bit about a new app that's out called Dolar app. This app has gone crazy in the expat community as being a actual transfer type of a way to transfer your money from the United States to Mexico and vice versa. So I'd like to introduce my guest, Miles Wakeham. Miles actually runs the Be Unconstrained podcast. I've been a guest on his podcast, and he has been in the crypto space since pretty much almost the beginning. And he's made a lot of money in crypto. He's also owned several tech companies, and his podcast focuses on how to become free. And we're not talking about freedom in the sense of political freedom, but we're talking about how to become financially independent and live your dreams and just live a free life. And he also happens to be building a studio in San Miguel de Allende. So he also knows a little bit about the expat community, and he also knows a little bit about Mexico and also the financial system in Mexico also, because he's building businesses in Mexico. So we're going to talk to him a little bit about this Dolar app. What I'm going to do is take us to the website, a mile, so we can take a look at it. Mm-hmm. It's a company out of Mexico. And if you look at it, it says here that your Dolar USDC account, they even give you a Visa and a MasterCard that works in Mexico. And you can transfer to your account with pesos or dollars. And it even gives you 4% back on your purchases on this MasterCard. And here it's up to 4% cash back. You use the card wherever you want, no hidden fees. And I think when they're talking about the fees, if you go into the website, I think it's just $3 every time you buy this. You make a deposit into your account. They also make it sound pretty impressive that they're also backed by, they've come out in several magazines and that type of thing, supported by MasterCard, Bloomberg, TechCrunch, Yahoo. So let's discuss this, Miles. And the first thing I want to do is, can you explain to the people, because I think people are under the misconception that this is a kind of a money transfer app, because the way it's being pushed right now is that you can take your money and transfer it to your Mexican bank account. And then what's even great about it, if you don't have a Mexican bank account, you can deposit this money and you have a debit card for those that can't get a bank account. So can you explain how this app actually works And what exactly is it? Because people are actually touting it. I don't know. You're familiar with Wise, which is, I guess, the most popular right now. But I think they charge, if, for example, if I'm transferring 1,000 pesos, I think it's like $12. And then they give you the current exchange rate. And these people give you the current exchange rate, but it's more like $3. So you're going to be saving money. So this is being touted as a way of transferring money from one place to another. And then they even say you can transfer from pesos back to the United States. So can you explain how this works, Miles?
Yeah. Well, firstly, thank you for having me on your show. Basically, what we're doing is we're trying to find a way to move money across a border. And the problem with doing that is that it engages a whole bunch of regulatory things that traditionally would be involved in such a transaction. So, in the old days, it would be Western Union or MoneyGram. And then Wise became, well, TransferWise, that became Wise, is pretty much now the dominant player in that space. So that works. The problem here is that what they're trying to do is to make the transfer of capital, of assets, from, let's say, from a US account to a Mexican account, because that's probably the most widely used case here. They're trying to use a crypto coin as a payment rail. And that's kind of an unusual situation because traditionally, the original promise when the first ever cryptocurrencies came out, probably the most noteworthy being Bitcoin, was that it was always touted in its original form as an electronic peer-to-peer cash system, which is exactly what you would want for this sort of purpose. But in this particular case, what we've got is a electronic peer to counterparty to peer transactional system, no different than a bank in effect. And yet, in that particular case, by using USDC, which is a form of a cryptocurrency asset, they're using that as a method to be able to get around the regulatory requirements that banks would typically have. Now, this may well work, and I would commend them and anybody else for trying, because there clearly is a need for money to be transferred from the US to Mexico, whether it be an expat that needs it to buy a car in Mexico or pay their rent or transfer their social security or whatever it might be. So I get it. There's a need here. There's also a need for a worker in the United States to want to send money back to their family in Mexico. And these people have traditionally become victims to a very egregious and hungry financial system that has taken anything up to 27 to 30% of the money earned by way of fees to cross the bridge like a troll. So I get it. There's a need here for this. But the way in which they're doing it and skirting around, I mean, what appears to be skirting around typical financial regulations is a bridge too far for me, I guess you would say. I think it's pushing it a little bit too hard, and there are a lot of factors that surround this whole thing that needs to be at least discussed. And I'm not saying that this company is intentionally doing anything wrong, but the problem is that, and this is my biggest concern for people, expats, for example, if you start moving serious amounts of money through this system and you trigger over the course of a year $10,000 worth or more, most expats do not realize they have to file FBAR reports, because this is in effect a bank. If they're holding your capital, they're no different to a bank or a trust or an IBC or any other legal entity that is holding capital. And therefore, they are subject, them, but more importantly, the customer as a US person is subject to filing financial crimes and enforcement documentation every year, or subjected to a $10,000 per year for a non-willful penalty. That's per account. And
And
this is dangerous stuff.
And the IRS has just hired a lot of IRS agents to start looking into this kind of stuff too, if I'm
Yeah,
not mistaken.
you're right. And if we exceed 50,000, then you get into a whole series of FATCA laws. And unless you're a tax attorney or a legal scholar, it's very hard to be able to make sense of this stuff. And I'm not trying to scare people away from using something like this, but I am saying that you've got to understand that something that might appear on the surface to be inexpensive, cheap, and sort of Teflon coated can often get you in trouble. And you should at least know the rules before you start playing the game.
And the other thing that I want to kind of discuss, Miles, is and I have my little crypto portfolio of Bitcoin, and I was mining it back in the day, but a lot of things have changed in the crypto space with all these different projects and stuff. And I do know, and I'm not too familiar with this idea of stablecoin, because USDC, the way it's being pushed is that you get this coin that's $1. Basically, what you're doing is you're buying this cryptocurrency coin or virtual coin that's worth $1, but that's backed by $1. And then you're basically on the other end selling it to put it back in the bank. If is that's if I'm am I going the right direction here?
Yeah, to some, yes. What actually happens is that it's a very technical thing, and I don't want to bore your audience with nerdy stuff like that. But it basically uses the Ethereum network, and the idea is that you convert what effectively you buy Bitcoin, convert it to Ethereum or ERC20 tokens. It then converts and transfers over as a sort of parity with the dollar, and then it converts back to the currency of the destinations, in this case pesos, and then vice versa. But that's kind of the way it works.
And then the thing that concerns me, because I've seen this USDC is there's two things about USDC that concerns me. And the reason why it concerns me is because it's called USDC, which stands for US dollar coin. And so people might think that it's something already sanctioned by the US government or some type of cryptocurrency that's already approved by the US government. And is that the fact, or is that true?
I don't think there's any formal process of that. It's a coin that was effectively invented by or originated from a company called Circle, that was then sort of co-opted by the combination of Coinbase and Circle together. And on the surface, it sounds great. The problem is, and this is something which doesn't get spoken about enough until often it's too late. What happens with these sort of stable coins is they're used as an investment platform. Now, back in the original early days of crypto, and this is my old school crypto coming out, there were multiple what we would call use cases or network effects that were used for the currency. So they would include things like a medium of exchange. That is, I can send some token of value from me to you, and there is no counterparty. It goes directly between the two of us. And you know that what I sent you is legit, it's not fraudulent, and it's not duplicated, it's not counterfeited. And that was a really great property of cryptocurrency. The other network effect was a store of value, and that is that you could hold these coins on the pretense that they'd go up in value. It's pretty good return on investment. I mean,
It sure is.
In a lifetime, you'd see that rarely, and I was lucky to be, at the right place at the right time and recognize the technology more than anything. But that's great. But the problem is that first level adopter story isn't the story that everybody else is experiencing, because I have conversations with family members, brother-in-laws, friends that I went to school with, and they'll sit down with me over dinner and they'll go, "Hey, Miles, should I buy Bitcoin?" And my answer is, I don't know. Do you understand it? And they don't. And so the answer to me would be, well, no. I mean, buy something you understand, right?
Hmm.
That's not to say that you're missing out on an opportunity, but I think at this point in time, be careful. And the thing about USDC is that it's not Bitcoin. It's basically a holding asset. But just as you rightly point out, the fact that it's got US as the first two letters does not in any way mean that it is a sanctioned currency by the United States. In fact, what we are seeing routinely now that the price of cryptocurrency has kind of been in the, call it the bear market phase, because it does go through these cycles. People have been punting on this illusion that it only ever goes up in value all the time. Kind of like real estate in 2008. Everyone thought real estate was a safe bet because it only ever went up until it didn't. Cryptocurrency is a far more speculative and far more volatile investment. The problem is that we've seen with a lot of these stable coins that they often are being they play out much in the same way that banks did in the 1800s, and that is that there was no central bank, there was no Federal Reserve back then, there was no FDIC insurance, and so what happened was banks would hold their customers' deposits. Customers would go to the bank, get their money out, put their money in, normal sort of stuff, until one day there was some panic in the street that maybe this bank's going to go insolvent. Next thing you know, all the customers rush on the banks. The banks have already taken all their deposits and used them for loans to other people. They can't get that money back. All of a sudden, they can't meet the demands of their depositors wanting to withdraw their money. The bank is insolvent, the bank goes bankrupt, game over, everyone loses their money. This is the Wild West. And in the case of crypto, this is what is happening. And I'm not saying that all currencies are formed, are in this situation, but these so-called stable coins, such as the competitors to USDC like Tether, Luna, other coins like that, have been notoriously dumped to zero in value. So the importance that has in this particular case is that if you're moving $1,000 from the US to Mexico and you park it in this account using their credit card to get the money out, or you just hold it there because you couldn't get a bank account, all of a sudden you find one day you wake up and you see on the news that so-and-so went bankrupt or so-and-so's insolvent. It's bye-bye money for you. I mean, there's no FDIC insurance here. There's no central bank to bail you out. This is on you. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't use something like this, because it probably is an inexpensive way of doing things. But what we consider to be safe haven should not be considered always safe haven. And the biggest example of that would be one of the largest crypto exchange in the United States, which is Coinbase. Well, Coinbase this year posted a $2 billion loss. Now, I don't know too many businesses out there that can survive a $2 billion loss, but these are the people who are holding the USDC. So unless they've got an equal amount of actual cash reserves to back the USDC that's being held, well, it could run its course. Now, the other side of it is the people behind Dolar app. Every time that you put your money in there should be something matched on their end to hold it so that it is in fact stable. And my concern when I looked into this application wasn't the functionality of it being a medium of exchange. It was the fact that nowhere on their website can I find out who owns this company. And nowhere can I actually discover anything about the history of the founders, or what is the risk factor associated with this. These guys might be 100% legit, great people, ethical, fantastic. That's good. But they're acting like a bank. And banks, by law, have to publish this information. And in this particular case, we don't know who we're dealing with. And that's a concern. And again, like I said, if you add all of these risk factors together, For me, it's a bridge too far. But for you do you, right? I mean, everyone has their threshold of pain here. Um,
Well, and like I always say, Miles, in my channel, I always give information, but I tell everybody in the end, it's your decision to make. And the reason why I bring these things up is it's not to tell you not to use it or not to tell you, even when I do my safety videos, I say, I'm not telling you don't travel through this place, but be careful or use these precautions or be able to make an educated decision. And sometimes in a lot of this stuff, people don't know how it actually works. And I think you bring up a good point because the way it's been touted is for every coin, there's a dollar that's somewhere in a bank account. I think Circle is the one that handles that. And they claim that they purchase US Treasury bonds to back these coins, that for every coin, there's a dollar in US Treasury bonds. But then I have looked into the company and there's no clear reports of where they actually have this money. Some even believe that they have some of this money in crypto, which has been very volatile. Also, the way a lot of these companies work is they use the money that you give them to lend it out, for example. So there's no telling how financially solvent. And you brought up a good point about Coinbase losing money. So if they have to dip into these investments or whatever, there is a possibility that dollar coin could crash. The other thing that I also want to bring up, and I've seen lately in the crypto space, and this actually happened to me with XRP, which is Ripple, which was a coin that was touted for making wire transfers. And the SEC decided that they were going to go after Ripple or XRP. And now you can't, I still own the XRP, but I can't sell it anywhere. I can't transfer it anywhere because right now that there's an ongoing lawsuit by the SEC on XRP trying to say that it's a security. And what I've been seeing is that the SEC is going after a lot of these coins, trying to say they're a security and they're not a tender or whatever you might say. Does that risk even go over to something like USDC?
Oh, totally. In fact, I would even say that it may be heightened because right now we have a federal government in the United States, that the Federal Reserve at least have an open white paper and research project going on board right now and moving ahead quite swiftly towards what they would call a CBDC, which is a central bank digital currency, and what we would, call Fed coin. And the whole idea of it is to have a US government issued currency that can be transferred in the digital space in the same way that you make Venmo payments or PayPal payments or whatever, but you're using actual US currency issued by the Federal Reserve, underwritten by the Federal Reserve, and insured by the appropriate parties. Now, there's a number of reasons governments want to do that, and they vary, but a lot of it is to do with privacy or transparency in transactions. They want to ensure that money movements through across borders are legitimate and they're not used for illicit things like terrorism, drugs, weapons, and so on. They feel that the transparency that they will have with these transactions enables them a better means to actually control that. And I'm probably preaching to the choir here because your experience in federal law enforcement.
Yeah,
You're more of an expert than that, and I am.
I actually used to be involved in money laundering investigations, and that was one of our concerns was, the regulation of a lot of this stuff because of what you were mentioning is FBAR reports. For example, we would look at FBAR reports. We look at different types of reports that are generated by banks that are regulated and given rules that this is how you need to report certain things. And a lot of times it was for investigative purposes and making sure that the money wasn't changing into the wrong hands, or it wasn't money laundering. But at the same time, I think one of the things that you were saying is that it's kind of an invasion on your privacy. I mean, I'm not, I was involved in these types of investigations, and it comes down to how much of your privacy do you want to give up to have the benefit of the protection. For example, I always used to use the court system as an example. We have the jury system. A lot of times people get acquitted that are guilty, but that's the price you pay for having the jury system, for example. But one of my concerns is that the SEC is looking at it, and I think I was just reading something just recently, and I think in your group about library, one of the, which is a token, which is equivalent to what a USDC is, that people were using to and on a platform like YouTube to tip people to give them money, and the SEC just won a lawsuit against them, which kind of freezes that asset for that person, or it either goes away, per se. So what I think I want to get across to the audience is if you, I have nothing against this app. And I think one thing somebody once told me in the crypto space, and I think this is what I've always took this to heart, is when you get involved in the crypto spaces, don't spend any more money than you're willing to lose. And, I mined Bitcoin when it was back in, back in the late 2000s, and it was at about 6,000 a coin. And, I was able to sell my equipment, recoup the cost. And I know that if it goes to zero, this is what I lost. I mean, this is the amount of money I lost. And I think this is where people need to be careful with this app is, for example, if I'm going to maybe transfer $1,000 tomorrow, it may be good to use this app to transfer it over, but with the consciousness that if things go bad and you wake up in the morning and your $1,000 is gone, then, it might be gone, but I only lost $1,000 versus holding 5,000, 6,000, 7, or maybe even 5,000 for some people is their life savings. And they're using this credit card because it's really convenient because they don't have a Mexican bank account. It works in Mexico and they can do all of these things. So I think that's the takeaway from this. And I think that's my concern. And I think the concern that you were saying too is that there's no regulation on this at all. And there's no insurance. When you wire transfer from bank to bank, you have some type of insurance. The other thing also, Miles, is, and maybe you might know a little bit about this, is, for example, they're talking about ACH withdrawals. In other words, okay, I want to get $1,000 worth of USDC so that I can send it to Mexico, and I'm going to do a ACH withdrawal. I'm not sure about this app, but if I'm not mistaken, when I've done ACH withdrawals, it takes 1 or 2 business days to take the money out of your account. And then after it gets out of your account, then it goes into the other person's account. Now, I do know Wise. If you do a lot of business with them, they automatically kind of take your word for it and they transfer the money the same day or in a couple of hours. But what happens if, for example, I send $5,000 to this company for USDC through an ACH withdrawal and it's taking 3 days, and tomorrow, let's say I do it today, and tomorrow USDC goes to zero? What happens to my money?
It goes to zero. I mean, that's going to be the natural thing. It's just going to follow the path. I mean, look, this is one of those you better have a chair when the music stops moments. You don't want to be caught off guard with this. It's got to be something that you do in small amounts, and you are willing, like you say, you're willing to take the risk. You're willing to lose it. You probably won't. There's probably a 99.9% chance that it will go smoothly, but I feel for the people like you mentioned. I mean, we've got a lot of people who were lucky enough to get a Mexican residency card because they earned a certain amount of money per month that met the financial solvency requirements, and they were able to get it. Uh, a number of years back, those financial solvency requirements were fairly low and reasonable, and often people who were living purely on Social Security were able to meet those requirements. And I know you and I probably we've met everybody we meet somewhere in Mexico who fits into that sort of expat model. They're more retirees. They're more people who have gone there for an easy life, for a freer and simpler and a more positive life for their final quarter of life or whatever. The reality is those are the people who have the least amount of protection and the most to lose. And the fact that you probably can't get a social security deposit plopped into your bank account in Mexico that you're going to need to transfer those funds over, obviously somebody living, close to the wire is going to want to go with the cheapest possible option. The worst case scenario is those are the people who have the most to lose as a percentage of their income. And that's not right. That's not fair. If it To me, look, I come from a world in which integrity and ethics and just doing the right thing matters. And I think most of the people, maybe at our age and even older, shared that common experience. They make assumptions that the world is trustworthy and that life is good and that people do the right thing. They don't. That's the problem. And given the opportunity to not do the right thing, they will take it. I'm not saying they all do, but I'm just saying that I've spent most of my career working in areas in cybersecurity and regulatory. I worked, the Department of Defense in Australia in the early part of my career. My whole life was all about what happens when things go wrong, not what happens when everything goes right, because when everything goes right, you don't need somebody like me. You don't need somebody like me when you've got problems. And the thing is that, most entrepreneurs, you make your money solving problems, which is a good thing, but you don't want to create them. And at the same time, I mean, we look to our government to look after us at some point. I mean, after all, they're the ones paying the Social Security check, right? If the assumption is that they will have our back if something bad happens, when it comes to this sort of stuff, they have no way of intervening. And that's part of the reason why they're pushing to try to get rid of stable coins and try to get rid of these altcoins and to bring the world back to a simpler place, because there are too many people out there doing what we in the crypto industry call rug pulls. They will pump something up beyond its actual value, try to encourage people to invest in it. Then the founders pull all the money out, and then before anybody knows, they've gone to live in Bali and everyone else has lost their shirt. We're coming out of a period of time in the last 10 or so years that has been a bull market. And it was, look, any man and their dog could make money in the stock market over the last 10 years. You just stuck it in a passive index fund and you made 10%. Who wouldn't want that? But that's not the world we live in anymore. We're now living in the reverse of that, the bear market. And that means that companies are losing money, and companies who may be insolvent are trying to pretend that the emperor actually has clothes and that they can actually survive through this bear market. But I'll guarantee, if you look at the history of and particularly the ages of company founders that were involved in this, they haven't had more than 10 years since they left college in the working career. And so they're not prepared for the downside of this. And yet anybody who's backing projects which involve putting their money in is inheriting the same risk. And my concern is that people who are living on Social Security, who might see this as an incredibly attractive option, are the ones with the least amount of recourse and with the most to lose. And what's important, I mean, look, I'm not going to single out names here, but I will say if you're interested in learning something about this, go to the website of Dollar App, go all the way down to the bottom of the homepage and look in the About section and have a look at who holds currencies and who holds money as kind of a banking kind of entity that holds the money in the interim. You'll get a name or two of a couple of companies there. Google them and look for Forbes magazine articles about them, and you'll read things that you probably don't want to hear. And I'll leave it at that. I'll let it up to the individual if they're choosing to want to do that, but do your due diligence. And the worst thing that we don't have here is a lot of historical information about who are the founders, what is the actual amount of capital held in reserve to be able to handle the withdrawals that come out. And the worst one, I think, as I started the whole conversation about, is that people don't realize that what might seem like a cool little way to move money from X to Y you can end up in a lot of hot water if you don't understand FBARs and FATCA regulations, and you don't have the appropriate advisors nearby to be able to keep you out of trouble.
And I really appreciate your insight, Miles. And, actually, I learned a couple of things or two from you over time and listening to your podcast. And, I think it's very important that we do our due diligence, do our research. That's the whole purpose of my channel, is to say, do your research. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm just giving you some facts and make an educated decision. Maybe for me, moving a couple of $1,000 or $1,000 is okay, but maybe for somebody else, they can't risk losing that $1,000. That might be their whole monthly income. And I think that that's where we need to, set back. It's the thing about this is that what really concerned me about this is that the way it was presented is this cool new app that's backed by money. You're not going to lose your money. It's cheaper. And for those of you who can't get a Mexican bank account, we're even going to give you a Visa, and we're even going to give you 4% back on your cash. And if you hold it in there, I think somewhere in there, I read that they give you 3% interest on your money that you're holding in that account. So this sounds like a great deal. And then I'm going to pay $3 instead of $12 for TransferWise. I think it's just one of those things where just be aware that there's a risk, and it's not as simple as everybody is saying is, hey, buy this coin and this coin. It's like me having a penny in my pocket and saying this penny's worth a penny because it's backed by the United States government somewhere. Now, we would say in the old days it was backed by gold, but now it's backed by, promises, I guess you might say, by the U.S. government saying that this penny's worth a penny. But now that the government's in so much debt, it's an IOU more than anything else. But you have something backing it saying this is worth a penny. But you don't have anything here backing it saying, all you have is someone saying, when you put this dollar in, we put it in, it's worth $1. But nobody telling you where the money is going, being deposited, and what happens if the company becomes insolvent. And I really thank you, Miles, for coming on and explaining how this works and giving a perspective from a person that's in business and that understands these things, not only on the level of crypto, but on the level of business too, just like you were talking about the tax consequences. Also, another thing that I will mention is that one of the things that the IRS, and it's never really been clear to me, is that every time you buy and sell crypto, it's supposed to be a taxable event. So, I don't know how that works with $1 to $1. And then you also have the Mexican government. One of the other things that I think I need to note with a lot of people is just recently the Mexican government is saying that everybody that is a resident needs an RFC. You have to get your RFC. An RFC is the equivalent to your social security number. In the United States, your social security number is your everything. In Mexico, you hold two numbers. One number is your unique identifying number as a resident, and which is your corp, and then the RFC is for the purpose of taxes. But now they're saying even if you don't pay taxes in Mexico, you still have to get this RFC because anytime you do any kind of financial transactions in Mexico, they're tracked. They do this thing called a factura. And one of the things that we're not aware of yet is how is the Mexican government going to start handling cryptocurrency? One of the things that you need to remember is that even the banks are looking at these deposits and saying, okay, you have $10,000 deposited in your account last week. Where did it come from? They're starting to look at those things a lot more. And now, it used to be that you could start up a bank account with your passport, even if you're a resident, and there wasn't identifiers. But, once you become a permanent resident, the Mexican government really doesn't know where you are, unless you report your address and all of that stuff. And now, with this RFC, it's trackable. A lot of these transactions are traceable. And so we don't know which way the Mexican government is going to actually treat this too. I don't know if you have any kind of insight as to if the Mexican government has any kind of policies on cryptocurrency or if they've even looked at regulating it or anything like that.
A number of years back, they were quite liberal about it, and they were encouraging people to get involved in cryptocurrency in Mexico. And then I guess it was sometime around about 2019, 2020, it all changed, and the Mexican government came out and said that they themselves were working on their own central bank digital currency for the country, and it wanted to be issued by Mexico. So not unlike the United States, these are threats that would happen to any sort of third-party private version of that. And whereas some countries like El Salvador, for example, have made Bitcoin legal tender for doing transactions, Mexico has not. And so one would have to look at this with some level of, concern. I mean, we're in the Wild West here. You brought up an incredibly valuable point and something which I was immediately thinking in my mind, I didn't even consider that. Every US person who has to file a tax return, whether they be a resident of the United States or an expat, because we're all subject to, global citizen-based taxation. We're not resident-based taxation in the US. We all have to fill out a form, and on that form is a little checkbox that says, do you hold cryptocurrency? I'm not sure the exact wording, but it's something along those lines. And if you lie on your tax return, well, that's perjury. You don't want to do that. Now, I would ask the question, if I held money in this app, am I holding cryptocurrency? Because if the answer to that is yes, because I know full well that it's done using USDC, then that changes how I'm going to fill out my tax return. And it brings out an entirely separate schedule, which I have to fill out on my tax return, that shows every one of those money movements and every one of those transactions that has to go in there for that very reason. Now, I'm not an attorney, but I tell you what, I pay a lot of money to attorneys to keep me out of trouble. And I'm just sort of thinking, there's a conversation right there I could have with my attorney next time I call him up on the phone, because it would seem to me that in this particular case, if you're using crypto as you put money in, you buy USDC, you then sell USDC to peso, that you've just created something in your tax return you better be reporting. And I think this is opening up a can of worms, and no one's talking about this stuff.
Yeah, and I think, even in the crypto space in general, no one's really talking about a lot of this stuff. And I think we take into consideration that a lot of times, and we have to be very careful because I think I mentioned this at the beginning, is that IRS is how many, 80,000 employees, 87,000 employees that they're hiring to start looking at all of these different types of things. I'm not talking about just crypto. I'm talking about tax. Normally in the United States, we're used to filling out our tax return and they take our word for it. I swear to God, I filled out my tax return and you get your refund And maybe, and actually the IRS has gotten a little bit more automated. If there's a anomaly with a deposit and a 1099 or something like that, they might send you a notice and say, oh, by the way, you wrote this off in your taxes. Can you send us a receipt? And then if you can't produce a receipt, okay, I can't produce a receipt. Okay, now you owe us $100 or $2,000 or $5,000. But what I see is that we need to start being careful with a lot of this stuff because instead of Scouts Honor anymore, it's going to be a little bit more scrutinized. And I think crypto is one of the spaces that we need to be very careful with. And I think that, like you said, we're in the Wild West with all of this stuff. Just make an educated decision. And if you plan to use this app, do it judiciously. And then the other thing is if I use a service like Wise, the Mexican bank knows that it's another bank on the other side that sent it. And if the SAT, which is the Mexican tax officials, come back to me and say, this $5,000 that I'm building a house right now, so I'm transferring large amounts of money. I've already even been contacted by my American bank. Why did $80,000 get wired to Mexico? And I have to explain to the American bank that I'm building a house in Mexico, and that they take a note of it and everything else. And now if the bank on the Mexican side says, how come you received $80,000 and you're not paying taxes? Well, you know what? I'm building a house in Mexico. I'm retired. I have all the supporting documentation to tell SAT that I already pay taxes we have a tax treaty with Mexico. I already paid taxes on this money in the United States. But that also brings up another can of worms, like you were saying. And if you make certain amount of income in these tax treaties or over a certain amount of income, then you end up being liable to the other country for the money. For example, in the United States, if you make Mexican income, you can make up to a certain amount. You still have to report it to the IRS, but you don't have to pay taxes on that money because you're paying taxes in Mexico. But then anything over a certain amount, you're also liable to the United States. So, these are things that you really need to consider. And maybe it may be worth the 1 peso or 2 peso difference in exchange rate. And maybe it may be worth paying $5 or $6 extra to be safe. That's all. That's my thinking.
Yeah, I think so. I think you're onto something there. I mean, if you're going to do creative and bleeding edge sort of financial transactions like this, just know that you're under the same magnifying glass that anybody moving money across a border will be under. You'll always be considered guilty before you're actually proven innocent with these things. And it's not because you're doing anything wrong. It's just because these sort of payment rails are used for people who do things wrong. And you don't want to get sort of grouped into that category, even by some artificial intelligent bot at the IRS or the FBI or something that just picks up this transaction, and next thing you know, you've got to start answering questions. That's a difficult one. I would always say get the advice of a tax professional, and more importantly, get the advice of somebody who understands international taxation, because we in the US are only one of 2 countries in the world that have citizen-based taxation. Everybody else is resident-based. And if you think that an attorney in Mexico understands the nature of citizen-based taxation in the US, you're probably going to be disappointed. And if you understand that your CPA in the US understands international compliance reporting and so on for other countries, you're probably also going to be disappointed. You probably need to find somebody who specializes in these things, get the rules, and let them advise you. And if they advise you that using an app like this is safe and it's worth doing and you can save some money, then take that advice. That's great. But without that advice, you're a babe in the woods here, and it is the Wild West, so be very careful.
And I think one of the things that I always warn people is a lot of the advice that a lot of expats are taking are from other expats that are in
Yeah.
Facebook groups. And a lot of times they don't understand the whole. And I always say this, it's not necessarily because the person knows or doesn't know, but a lot of times people are speaking from experience. Like, for example, if you ask a question in the expat group and they'll say, oh, I want to bring 4 computers across and, what's the regulations? Well, the regulation is you only bring 1 and then you get taxed on all the other 3. But when you get the answer, you're going to get 4 or 5 people say, oh, I bring 4 computers across all the time. No problem. And then what happens is you sit there and you say, oh, okay, well, that guy brought 4 computers, so I should be able to bring 4 computers too. It's not because he brought the 4 computers in and Mexico said, bring them in. It's because he didn't get the red light and they didn't check his luggage and he walked through customs with no problem. But you don't want to be the person that gets the red light and you open up your suitcase and you have 4 computers and they say, guess what? 3 of those computers you have to pay duties on. So those are the things that we need to be careful of. And we rely on all of this information from Facebook groups or YouTube channel, or even my YouTube channel. But even with my YouTube channel, what I try to stress is that when I'm doing a video, I look into it. I contact the people that know about the subject. And I'm not necessarily an expert. I'm just a person that's able to research and use my personal experience in having worked with the Mexican government or having worked with the US government. But it's all about doing your due diligence. And no matter what, when I do my videos, it's about doing my due diligence. And so you need to be very careful when you're getting this kind of advice from a YouTuber or from Facebook, because necessarily that person may not know the consequences. And they have the greatest intention in telling you, hey, use this. This is really great. And it's really worked for me. And maybe it has. And it is a great deal. But maybe they don't understand the consequences or the possible consequences of using it. So you just have to take it with a grain of salt. That's what I always tell everybody. Take it with a grain of salt.
Yeah. No, look, and I've got to commend you because you've helped me out in so many cases of questions that I've had that I would have been completely derailed if I took the advice of other people in this area, and particularly things like regarding the changing nature of immigration in Mexico, because it changes on a dime. Every week goes by, there's some new shocking change in regulatory stuff that who knows where it's coming from. And to take the advice of somebody which might have been valid 3 months ago and then find out it's not can become an expensive exercise of frustration. Yeah. I would also say, look to where the motivation of the person giving you advice is coming from as well. If they're going to make a buck off something and they're going to sort of shill that, well, that's not a good thing. And that might be something you want to be careful of. On the other hand, if they're giving you the information, it's not costing you anything, and it's just a goodwill exercise, a community exercise, then that's worth a lot. And don't undermine that. I mean, the value of this stuff, we all want to help each other. But, my experiences that happened a year ago are completely different than what happens today. And, in all different areas. And again, my experience to happen if I'm moving money to Australia, where I'm originally from, is a very different game than what it's like moving money to Mexico. Your case will, your situation will vary, and best that you get proper advice from a professional who can actually keep up to date, and their job is to be as up to date with this stuff as possible.
Well, Miles, I really want to thank you for coming on my show and, being a guest here and giving your point of view. When I saw this, I didn't want to just give my point of view. I wanted to grab somebody that had some experience in this space. I really want to thank you for coming on to my show. I really suggest that you check Miles out. He has some really neat ideas. and I was very impressed the first time I ever listened to one of his podcasts. I became a Patreon instantly. And he has a lot of great ideas, and he talks about this contrarian thinking. And, you know, it's one of those things that I think it is of really great value. And I would really, really, really recommend his podcast. Thank you very much, Miles, for coming. Really appreciate your expert opinion. Miles Wakeham, people, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hope this information was useful, and I hope it helps you make an informed decision if you choose to use the Dolar app. Don't forget to subscribe, and see you soon.